Okay, pre-cal students, in this video we will quickly look at the fundamental trig identities. Some of these we have already gone over in previous videos, and you have already copied them onto your trig identity sheet. There will also be some new ones today, so please pause the video when you need to and write in the new ones onto your trig sheet so that you have these new trig identities, okay? And then after you've done that, go ahead and restart the video. All right, let's continue on. Your heading today is Fundamental Trig Identities. Please copy that in your notes. Your heading today is Fundamental Trig Identities, Lesson 10.1, and be sure to include today's date in your notes. All right. Once again, the heading today is Fundamental Trig Identities. The lesson number is 10.1, and be sure to include today's date. All right. Now let's continue on. Here are the trig identities. We are going to talk quickly about these. Okay. The picture below is a little light colored. Okay, but if you'll turn in your books to page 628, you will see the same thing that is pictured here. Now, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause the video at this time. Go through this entire sheet in your book, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you don't have any new ones on here, okay? But if there are any new ones on here that are not on your original trig sheet, go ahead and copy those new ones onto your sheet so you have them on your trig identity sheet, and then go ahead and restart the video after that, okay? Okay, I want to quickly talk about these trig identities, so take some notes if you need to. Don't forget that sine and cosecant are what we call reciprocal functions, okay? If you take the sine of an angle and you take the cosecant of that same angle, whatever answer you get for sine, let's pretend you got 2/3 out for sine, then cosecant, of course, would be 3/2, okay? And we've learned all this. I'm just quickly reviewing. Don't forget that cosine and secant are reciprocal functions. And don't forget that tangent and cotangent are also reciprocal functions, okay? You will use these two trig identities here a lot. Tangent equals sine over cosine, and cotangent equals cosine over sine. You will use those a lot, so make sure you're familiar with those. They're called the quotient identities. You will not need to know that. I'm just pointing that out to you. Okay. You will also use the Pythagorean identities a lot, so be very familiar with those. Sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1, and 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared, and 1 plus cotangent squared equals cosecant squared. Okay? So make sure you're familiar with all of those. Now the cofunction identities, these are really interesting, so please pay attention to these. Watch this carefully, please. I want to explain what these mean. Notice, please, students, how when it comes to cofunction, let me go back up here. When I talk about reciprocal functions, sine and cosecant go together, cosine and secant go together, and tangent and cotangent go together, okay? But when I'm talking about not reciprocal functions, but cofunction identities, please look. Sine and cosine go together, tangent and cotangent go together, and secant and cosecant go together. Now, what do we mean by cofunction identities? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's what we mean. I'm just going to make this up. I have no idea if this is accurate. Let's say the sine of, I don't know, 40 degrees is 1/3. I'm just making that up, okay? Well, what is the cofunction identity for sine, cosine? And if I put 50 here, I also get out 1/3. And here's why. Please listen to me carefully. If these two functions are cofunctions, sine and cosine, and please don't miss this, these two angles here add up to 90, then these two here will be the same. Please don't forget that. Let me say it again. If these two functions here are cofunction functions, I guess, and if these two angles here add up to 90, then they will get out the same answer. So the same thing I just showed you here would be true for tangent and cotangent. So if I had the tangent of 32 degrees, that would equal the cotangent of 58 degrees, because tangent and cotangent are cofunction identities, and 32 plus 58 is 90. Okay? And the same thing is true with secant and cosecant. So please make sure you understand that. Pause the video if you need to and write all that down. Just make sure you understand it, okay? And then, I'm not going to go into great explanation, but if you'll remember back to Algebra 2, you learned what an even and an odd function was. An even function is symmetric to the y-axis, and an odd function is symmetric to the origin. And so when they call these even and odd identities, they're referring to kind of looking at them like a function. We're not going to get into that a whole lot, but that's where they get the phrase even and odd identities. And if you'll look, when you take the sine of a negative angle, it's the same thing as taking the sine of the positive angle, as long as you put the negative sign out front. So if I have the sine of negative 150 degrees, that's the exact same thing as picking up the negative sign and putting it out here and taking the sine of 150 degrees. Now, notice that's not true for all of these. Look at cosine. If you're taking the cosine of negative 150 degrees, it's the exact same thing as taking the cosine of 150 degrees. Okay? And so what I'm trying to show you, I'm trying to give you examples so you know what all of these trig identities are showing you, okay, or what they're saying to you. Once again, that's it for the video. It's a really short video, but students, make sure that you have all of these on your trig identity sheet and make sure you're familiar with them, okay? Reciprocal identities, quotient identities, Pythagorean identities, cofunction identities, and the even and odd identities.